Welcome everyone to our weekly advice. Today's episode will take a look on how scores exist in VNs. We'll be looking mostly at our favorite aggregate site, VNDB, and how it defines those scores, and after that we'll discuss our approach to those definitions and those scores. So please, Taurus, what does the VNDB define scores?
Hello, Taros here, along with co-host MR. One reason I really like VNDB is because it's a database for all sorts of visual novels out there in the world, and they allow you to make your own profiles and to vote on titles you've read. They go off of a 1 to 10 scoring system where 1 is the worst and 10 is the best, and they'll collect everyone's scores so you can see averages, just like any other movie database, for example. But, like I mentioned, one thing that they do is that they provide labels for each of the scores. So, for example, a 7 is labeled good, and then you go down to like a 5 out of 10 is so-so, and then you get down to like a 2 out of 10 is awful. One reason I really like that is because for some people, they can just apply whatever label they want to their own ratings. You see it a lot that happens in the video game industry where anything below a 6 out of 10 is treated like garbage. Or anything that comes out has to be like at least a 7 out of 10, and then an 8 out of 10 is just, kind of okay, and a 9 out of 10 is pretty good. Whereas I've always felt that's been kind of silly, because you have the whole scale at your disposal, right?
Yeah.
If you're limiting yourself to just working off the top, then, what's the point? You might as well keep it to a 4-star system or something else where people aren't getting into heated arguments over decimals, like if something's rated a 9.1 instead of a 9.2. Especially because, like I mentioned earlier, other people have differences in how they use the scale. So when you read something and then you want to decide, oh, hey, this title is so-so, it was just okay. When you say it's at 5 out of 10 on VNDB, it can help communicate that to everyone.
Okay, on that note, I have a question, because so far you described opportunity to score and labels each number with their description, let's say. But how do you feel about the point that, or correct me if I'm wrong on that, VNDB make you rate the game in integer, not decimals, so in a full number?
That's their default. VNDB does let you provide custom decimal points, like if you want to go 7.5.
Okay, I did not know that, to be honest.
Yep, that's let me see, if you take a look, yeah, you can go down and they have a box at the bottom for custom.
Okay.
Some people like to do that. I don't, because I feel like if you're using the whole scale and they're giving you adjectives, then you can stick to those. And if you need more than 10 options, then I'm like, how fine-tuned are you getting here,
Okay. I mean, I get it.
That's a good point, though, where I don't like using decimals, because all too often I see people do that, and it's because they're starting to compare the titles they've read with other titles.
Okay.
Like they read something and they decide, oh, this is okay, I would give it a 7 out of 10. And then they look at other things they've given a 7 out of 10 like a year ago. And they're like, well, was this really on the same level as that? They're like, no, maybe it edged out a little. And they give it stuff like 7.25.
So if I understand correctly, they turn scoring system into ranking system. Because at that point, you stop treating this game as a 7 out of 8. It's like, this is below that 8. And then another 7 arrives, and you have a choice to make. Is it on par of that 7? It should be 7.5 because it's better than that 7, but worse than that 8. and it turns scoring system into ranking system, which is inadvertently in some capacity. Scoring system is a ranking system, or at least you can treat it as such. But if you fine-tune it to such a degree that you can never equate two titles on the same score, you create a ranking.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Do you prefer to do that? I know you just asked about if you could use decimals and stuff, so is that what you were hoping to use them for?
Okay, so it goes to me. Okay. When it comes to previous episode, because in the previous episode we were talking about the purity of VNs, and I was a bit a rebel. Then if that was my rebellious phase, I'm downright anarchistic now, because I do not rate VNs. At all.
You don't rate them at all?
At all.
Then, like, generally, how do you decide? How do you tell people that there's something you kind of liked more than you kind of liked something else?
I use nuance. I remember a lot of what I read and why I would recommend them. At some point in my life, I stopped believing in scoring system using numbers. Because at certain point, let's say I have 107s. Like, what does that give me? But let's say I have 100 games or titles or whatever it may be, in which I remember one thing that gripped me, or a theme that they went with to this day, and that's a testament of recommendation from me. And that's way more important than number to me. I provided, I think it was in episode 2, I provided my VNDB link. And some people that truly believe in sanctity of scores will whip out their crosses and say sacrilege, because the only scores I use is 10, no other.
Wow, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's why I said, if the previous episode I was a rebel, then oh my god, I am an anarchist right now.
So you give everything you've read a 10 because, is that more so out of your rejecting the rating scale, or is it because like you legitimately think that they all belong on that high level?
Wait. I need to make something straight.
Mm-hmm.
I don't rate 10s to everything. When I give a score, it's a 10.
Ah, interesting.
Now you see my point. So this is something that truly stuck with me for a long time, and it was a unique experience that I want to highlight, let's say. I don't know. I don't know how to describe. They did something that was so phenomenal, I give them a 10. It doesn't have to be perfect, but in some capacity, there was something that was perfect when I read it. For example, very briefly, before we go to maybe how you have an example of score, I gave Grisaya a 10, just because one road in one moment showcased post-traumatic stress disorder in a way that I could not believe, and I had to quit that game for that day. It was that real and that perfectly done.
Wow. So like an emotional moment that hit you so hard.
Yes, exactly.
Like you mentioned, it left an impact on your life.
Yep.
Okay, so in your views, anything that like hits you that hard, I guess you could say deserves to be treated like a 10 out of 10?
Yes, I think you could say so. Even if they are by no means a masterpiece, I think that's the label they're using, or a perfect product. By no means they have to be that.
Ah, I see. On the other side of things, I like that you mentioned that VNDB labels a 10 a masterpiece.
Uh-huh.
I have been reading VNs for the better part of about 8-9 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
I still have not given anything a 10.
Okay.
Because of that, VNDB labels everything as a 10, a masterpiece. And as much as I've liked some titles, they haven't been perfect.
Okay.
Everything I've read, I've always thought, well, something was kind of choppy there, or I didn't like this one, arc in the story.
All right.
Or there were some annoying parts, or whatever have you. And as much as there's been several titles that have huge emotional impacts on me, the same way you've described, I can't honestly say that this was a masterpiece. Like, if I'm trying to defend a work to someone else, for example, obviously there's Fate Stay Night.
Okay.
It was one of the first big titles I read. It was pretty much my introduction to the world of visual novels. I have some of the best memories of my life just going through and blitzing through an entire route in a day because I just couldn't put it down. And this was an incredible delivery of storytelling with the music and the art and the reading. But in hindsight, I did finish it and I thought, there were some parts that really dragged. When you think about it, there's a few plot holes and whatnot. And it's not the sort of thing I can defend as being a masterpiece, even though it was hugely instrumental in my life. For you, for example, and for several others, they approach that term masterpiece as being something where the highs outweigh any of the lows there are, like something you wouldn't change that work at all.
First and foremost, I think before we continue our, discussion and differences, I need to say, I never feel that I need to defend my opinion and validate whether or not someone agrees with my score. With that, I also reject the idea I ever am objective. Never am I, nor will I ever try to be objective. I am completely 100% subjective always. With that, with honest heart and honest approach, I always not give a score, but when I gave, or at least when I think about giving score, I would always consider how I liked it, never from a standpoint of how would I rate as a critic a standalone piece of art.
Oh, that's very admirable.
So with that, obviously I'm open to discussion. I spent a lot of time with our music producer, let's say, to early morning talking about titles from Alisoft and sharing our opinions, which not necessarily align all the time. I'm open to that, but ultimately I always approach it from this perspective of being subjective completely. I never claim to have any means of defending that as an objective fact. I can claim an objective fact, for example, is that game short or long, because ultimately I can prove that with text, but I cannot objectively say it's gripping and emotional, because there will be some people who do not resonate with that topic, and for them it won't be.
I like the part where you said, not everything can be 100% objective, because, they're not.
Yeah.
They're all about their impact on you, the reader, and how much you enjoyed them. But you also mentioned about, acting as a critic when you rate these works. And that's another good point in that you're trying to condense this all down into one number.
Yep.
So what happens if you have something that's difficult to judge? Something like, Ever 17. Ever 17 is a story about, a group of people who get trapped in an underwater amusement park. And things go wrong and their lives are at risk and they have to wait for rescue, and there's all sorts of mysteries going on along the way. But anyone who's read Ever 17 can tell you that a lot of it is just boring. They're all waiting around for rescue and nothing happens, and you're waiting for something exciting to happen, something that would fit its scenario, But it just plows on for like 20 hours of nothing. And yet, back in the day, Ever 17 was super highly regarded entirely because of its last route, where all the mysteries started piling on and there were crazy plot twists. And this was finally the ending that everyone was anticipating this whole time with the title.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you rate something like that? When you have like 20 or so hours of it being boring as they're all just eating chicken sandwiches all day, every day. And then you finally get into like the last 5-hour stretch, which is amazing. How do you rate that? Like, heck, how do you even describe that if you like that or not? Obviously, if it's in a review, like you mentioned, you could tell people, hey, it's really boring and it's got a few good parts, but oh boy, everyone raves about the ending. But then how do you give a score to that? Like, do you have to weigh the ending more than anything when you say, well, I'll give it a 9 out of 10? If there's someone who reads it and they're just so bothered that they drop it 3 hours in, like, is their opinion any less valid?
Definitely not. I would never invalidate someone's opinion because there's a lot of problem with that. I'll maybe elaborate when we have time why. But I did not read Ever 17, so the closest comparison I have in my head is probably with Fate and the infamous cooking episode, meaning a lot of time they spent cooking during the day and having just menial tasks before the main part of the story arrives, which was after night usually. So on that,
for being an action story, especially in the first quarter of it so, there is a lot of
downtime,
normal daily life and just boring cooking and talking instead of action.
So I definitely understand. Sadly, when it comes to this discussion in particular, I'm more how can I say it? Forgiving is that maybe the word, or maybe I have more endurance to that. I would definitely read through Slog and rate it in my mind highly if the payoff is good enough, or even good. I mean, maybe good enough, because obviously if I spend 50 hours and the twist is very lackluster, I won't be satisfied. But if it's good enough, I won't have a problem with that. I have affinity to read longer pieces than shorter. So at least for me, that wouldn't be a problem if the payoff is good enough. And on that note, I'll just mention the example that I've recently finished. I finished Muramasa, and it is one of the most my kind of style of VNs that actually could be too my. I know that it's weirdly descriptive. It's my kind of dark fantasy, my kind of interesting meld of a world, lore, how it progresses and how the mystery is intertwined. And boy oh boy, I predicted so many twists, it left me disappointed in so many places.
Oh dear.
A lot of the time that game hooked me. I just couldn't leave it. So, because it's chapterized, it has some sort of start, end, and you know when the chapter starts and ends. So when the chapter started, I rarely could pick that down and stop. I couldn't, it was so interesting for me to get to know what happens in this particular chapter. But by the end of that chapter, I had multiple theories going on my head and going in my head. No way it's going to end like that, right? And it's exactly how it ends. And I'm like, what? Is that it? So many times I predicted the ending of a chapter. It felt sour for me, even though the game itself I would rate very high. I would definitely recommend, and it's very my kind of visual novel. But especially the early chapters were predictable, at least from my standpoint.
That's a shame.
Yeah.
Would you still recommend it to other people as a good title?
Definitely. Especially if you are a fan of Nitro Plus titles. Yep. Hopefully you won't figure out the twist and you'll have a better time. Which sounds like a super crazy recommendation, okay? But I figured out almost all of the twists that are on the common route. I had way less success with the splits. So meaning when you have a concrete routing or endings. Now those were good twists. But during common route, I think I had almost 100%. So yeah, that was awkward for me. Every single time when the chapter ends, I'm like, what? Really? Oh, okay. And then I read another one, then it had a hook at the start. I'm like, I can't leave it alone. I have to read it till the end. Many times I went sleep way past the normal hours because of that.
Oh no. See, that's one good thing about me. Even though I like reading mystery stories and whatnot, I don't think at all when I'm reading.
Okay.
So there's stuff I'll usually read titles where other people talk about the twist being obvious, and I'm just sitting here oblivious. Like, oh man, I just went along with the ride. I couldn't believe the reveal that that guy was the mastermind.
I get it. Somehow, sometimes I wish I could not analyze a work.
Oh yeah. In fact, speaking of Ever 17, one of my favorite titles is the Zero Escape series. 9 hours, 9 persons, 9 doors. Virtue's Last Reward. It reuses several plot points from a previous work that the writer worked on, the Infinity series, including Ever 17. I'm glad I didn't know that at the time, because if you do, you can see a lot of twists coming.
I see.
And I'm definitely sure that if I had that knowledge of spoilers beforehand, I wouldn't have rated those titles as highly.
I get it. Mm-hmm.
That's unfortunate.
It's like that.
On a different note, speaking of ratings, here's another topic for you, MR. Do you ever reread VNs and change your rating? Or at least in your unique perspective, do you ever change your opinions about a work after rereading it later?
Yes. I do reread, although not often, but I do. And yes, I did change my opinion, but also not often. So let's say I had a couple of instances in which I reread the VN. And out of those couple of times, I think maybe once I changed my opinion. So yes, it did happen. No, I don't really change my opinion on it. I think it's intertwined, me rereading visual novels, to the fact that I tend to read long epics. So meaning spanning multiple series, multiple titles, 10 plus, etc. For example, run series. So to refresh my memory on previous titles, I sometimes reread that in some capacity. Just to have...
like segments of it?
I try to read all of it, but segments is the least. The minimum.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, I did read Sengoku Runs 3 times. And I read Nekopara, I don't even know how many times. A lot. Because every single time new Nekopara release, I read all the previous ones. So
all of the at that point, if you want to get caught up on the story, you could just find a plot summary somewhere online, right?
Yeah, but I could also read it.
Oh my goodness. Well, did you enjoy it?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, that's good then. Good. Props for you.
Okay. But rarely I do that. Still, it's for Nekopara, it's pretty special. And it being one of my first ones, especially first one recommended by my best friend. So this is my starting point. And I mean, I enjoy it. It's a bit unusual on it. For me, because it's on a slice of life, but albeit with catgirls. So with some twist on it.
You mentioned it was one of the first ones you ever had.
Yeah.
Then would you say that's had a significant impact on your life? And If so, like, would you say that's something you'd give a 10, even though it's just a cutesy cat girl story?
I didn't give Necopara a 10, I think. But maybe I should, which is weird coming from me. Just because it was the first title that I could openly talk about with my friends. And this is something that comes from long time ago, when I was looking a place, a state of being, a state of purpose in life. And having a niche hobby does not help. Oh boy, how I would love to like football. I would have infinite people to talk about, but I don't. And I did not. Somehow I got recommended Necopara. I was apprehensive about it. I read it, I liked it, and I had something to talk about a lot. And since this is a topic I talk to this day, it holds a special place in my heart.
Oh.
Yeah, so on that note, maybe you're actually right. You solve the MR formula and it should have a 10.
Well, it's funny you say that, though, because I'm the opposite, where I definitely do not want to ever go back and change ratings that I've given.
Yeah, but that not necessarily means you need not read again.
That is true. That's true. More so, I don't ever reread stuff simply because there's way too many things to look forward to, and I only have so much time, so I gotta keep looking forward. But also because the way I see it is that when I read a title or experience a work, it's also me in that point of time in my life. Yeah. Like, I can tell you that back when I first started reading these things, like 9 years ago, I did not have the same opinions that I do now. And looking back at some of my thoughts on them, I can be like, well, okay, I think I over-exaggerated how much I like some of that stuff.
Sure.
But I'm not going to go back and reread them now when I am today, almost a decade later, because that's not the same experience. You mentioned it yourself, how you read Necopara, and that was the beginning, and it had a lot of, it had a lot of impact on your life too, between talking with your friend and getting introduced to this whole medium. Exactly. And I don't think revisiting a work and giving it a different score based on where you are now is fair to how you first treated it.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. When I'm rereading Necopara, I always go from the place of how much themes can I decipher, or maybe when I was younger I did not notice. So for example, camaraderie or family as a theme like I do now. Maybe some of those values they showcase in that work holds ground better right now. Because not necessarily work can be worse, because that's how you approach it till this point. Changing opinion and maybe rating them lesser because you are a different person now. How about rating them higher? Or maybe deriving new fun and exploring themes that did not hit you back then as they would now. It's a possibility. Again, I don't reread often, so I can't speak to that avail much. Although, on that topic, unless you have something to add on rereading, I have a question to you, because you read quite a lot of English original language visual novel, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Do you treat them differently during scoring because they are not the Japanese ones?
Do I treat them differently?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, yes, I do read a whole bunch of, I guess you could say indie projects. Because as much as I wish there are very few professionally done English visual novels out there.
True.
So a lot of times, to be honest, you're going to see some basic Ren'P projects with, hand-drawn art and royalty-free music. I don't let that stuff get to me.
Okay.
It's still a matter of how much I like it or how much I don't. Some people get really bothered by what they would call like low-quality soundtracks or whatnot, but for me, it's no big deal. It's I put a lot of emphasis on a story, on how much style it has, how much all of its parts come together into the whole. So even if something seems amateurish, I don't mind.
Okay.
A good example, actually, is Sepia Tears. It was a free project that was released, I want to say, back in 2013. And then it was sort of remastered and got bonus content all the way up in 2019. And it's a simple story about a high school boy getting caught in some romantic affairs, and he has to come to terms with his feelings about him and his friends and where his future is going.
Okay.
And to be honest, the best thing I could say about it is that it is amateurish. There's sketchline art, and it's the absolute basic Rempe templates. And there's all sorts of references to other popular visual novels. And it's clear the developers are like fanboys. They're the ones who like to just appreciate the medium so much that now they're here creating a free product for everyone else to enjoy and just having fun with it. Objectively, yeah, it's low quality across the board. But I don't mind that, because there's more to it, and I enjoyed the story for what it was, and again, I wouldn't hold those lack of production qualities against them.
Because I recently finished Gaikokuji no Sensei. It's definitely something that fits the criteria of English original language visual novel that feels amateurish in places. And another example that is, how can I say it, famous, let's say, Hatoful Boyfriend. I think it's a very good example of how it still can be very highly rated and beloved by community, despite it feeling like a B-grade visual novel, let's call it. And I can't believe I am saying it. It lacked basic features, even though, like a visual novel as you could expect, like the skip. Skip was very poor, if not non-existent in Hatoful Boyfriend.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And given that it, if I remember correctly, has as much as 13 different endings, it was a giant pain. Going back to Gaikokuji no Sensei, I recently finished it, and that brought me the memories of me reading Hatoful Boyfriend and being surprised in places. Again, I approach it. I don't set high expectation because I understand this is someone's first work. In this case, it was a Kickstarter-founded visual novel that I backed. But I felt the creator was passionate enough that I had faith in the product, and I wanted... And I think the premise also was very intriguing. It was about being a foreign teacher in a foreign land. So the atmosphere they created is fish out of water, I think is the best description. As an American, definitely. You travel to Japan to teach English, and you have no knowledge of Japanese yourself. So how do you communicate with other people? It's intriguing how they decipher it. There's a lot of body language you have to use in order to come across with your ideas. And also, one feedback loop they did is actually genius, because obviously it's an English original visual novel. So there's a voice actors, and they created a scenario in which the protagonist encounters girls that talk in English. But fine, okay, he takes solace in that. They can help him acclimate to surroundings. Fine. But then one of the girls actually doesn't speak English, and that's the most funny part. When she talks to you in Japanese, you as a protagonist talk to her in English, and you cannot communicate. That was so unique. I actually really love that concept.
Oh no, poor thing.
Like, that made me appreciate that good idea. Like, wow, that was actually really cool. Not only you get to feel like a fish out of water in an environment alien to you, but then you see that on the other side. Another person has a trouble with you. Like, wow. I really like that. Especially since I don't speak Japanese. So when they put specifically Japanese text of character talks to you, and I have no idea what they're talking about. That was interesting and very unique.
Funny bilingual bonus to anyone who did know it.
Exactly.
Oh, jeez.
Exactly. So, but I had approached this with, amateurish, how I say, expectation in mind. So, fair enough. It had some less than polished aspects to it, but overall, I like the script. I thoroughly enjoyed the game. So, yeah, it was very good, nice effort for the first title. Props to me. I would definitely recommend anybody who wants a short and sweet about being a teacher in a foreign land. It was really cool.
Super cool. Yeah. Well, that is about all the time we have today, though.
Exactly. So,
thank you, everyone out there, for listening to an VNture podcast. That is our session for today. If you have any feedback, then please let us know either in the comments or in the Discord channels or even through email if you'd so prefer. We definitely listen to it, and we are definitely striving to get better each time.
Yep, exactly. And hopefully we'll get some questions that will create a segment to answer all of your questions for this podcast in a dedicated Q&A. And for all,
yeah, we'd love to answer fan mail.
Exactly. And for all our dear listeners, take care and have a good day.